And I think that's why Eric Yuan and yourself really had the admiration and respect and commitment from the people, right? Put your people first, and they'll take care of your customers.
Exactly.
And
Happy
when you
people,
take care of your,
happy customers, happy shareholders.
there you go, right? So do you still have that policy, the open?
We do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so did you find it to be true? Did you find that treating, like offering that perk and all the other perks, free lunches and all the things that ReturnPath and probably now Bolster, all the things that you did, again, pioneering the way in not just saying that your people were your most important asset, but actually proving it? And did you find that to be a good return on that investment?
Every time.
Every
100%.
time.
Yep.
Yeah. Welcome to this episode of Everything Communicates. My name is David Tushek. I'm the CEO of Everything Communications, and I'm super excited to be sitting here today with my good friend, Matt Blumberg. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, David. It's good to be here.
Just so the folks know, you are a multi-book author. You are the CEO of what was really one of my favorite companies that I've gotten to work for. It was, at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was the 4th best mid-sized company in the US to work for. I think it was Forbes magazine called it that. Does that sound right?
Second, but who's counting?
It was second. I've been going around for all these years saying I worked for the 4th best mid-sized company, and I actually worked for the second. I guess at one point it was 4th. I guess it bumped up to second. And
I guess so. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. That's incredible. So it's a pleasure and an honor. And thank you for taking time out, because I know that you're extremely busy. I mean, I took a look at your LinkedIn profile before having you on, and I know that you're CEO over at Bolster. Well, why don't you go ahead and why don't you explain to the audience, what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bolster is a platform for startups and scale-ups, venture-backed and private equity-owned companies to find executives. So you can think of us as sort of a next generation or next generation kind of executive search platform. There are a few things that differentiate us from sort of traditional headhunters or recruiters. One is our roots are in doing what we call on-demand executive placements. So we have a very robust platform for placing fractional, interim, project-based executives with companies, mentors and coaches, and independent board members. We also are increasingly doing full-time placements as well. So we have kind of a unique approach to the executive search business that we think is much more tailor-made to earlier stage and growth stage companies. So anyway, that's what Bolster does. As part of that, our clients are CEOs, early stage and mid stage CEOs. I spent a lot of time talking to and counseling folks like that. I am one of those myself, multi-time founder. And the 3 books that we have are also very focused on kind of being the CEO's companion.
So you've got Startup CEO, and then follow up to that with Startup CXO.
Correct. Yeah. And then Startup Boards is the 3rd one. So it's about, if you think about the life of a CEO, you've got your team underneath you, you got yourself to worry about, you got your board above you. So we have kind of one field guide or instruction manual for each of the 3.
So there's so many things I think that would be valuable for you to share with our audience here. From a helping new CEOs and new executives to launch businesses perspective, also from a perspective of the world has changed dramatically, right? Businesses changed, people have changed. I spoke to an executive yesterday at one of Canada's big banks, and she was saying, you know what, Dave, you're right. Like I'm on Team Dave now, like in terms of hybrid working and the necessity for businesses to meet their employees' needs. And one of those needs is to be able to work where they want to work, when they want to work. And this is new. This is a new thing. And I want to ask your opinion of this in a moment, but this is one thing that I'm seeing and hearing. One of the biggest challenges that CEOs are dealing with is oftentimes, depending on probably generation more than anything else, from what I can tell, CEOs want people in the office, and they're pretty much the only ones. Their people don't want to come in for the most part. What are you seeing about that? And what advice would you have for CEOs or executives in this position?
Well, I think before I answer that, I'll talk about I think a broader, almost kind of generational change that I think
Mm,
started to happen 20 to 15 years ago. That's sort of the backdrop. So what you're talking about is like absolutely, you know, happening at the moment since the pandemic, the last few years. But I think there's some pretty important context to that.
yeah.
And if you think about the sort of current generation of up and coming workers, the things that have started to bubble up since really since tech and the internet took off as well, are things around the employee experience.
Yes.
And I don't think anyone ever people didn't really care about the employee experience in the in the last century very much.
Hmm.
Employees were interchangeable. There were certainly companies that had values where they talked about, people are our most important asset. There were some companies that always invested in their people more than others. Um, but employee experience was like, I think if you said that to someone in 1992 when I was coming out of college, they would have looked at you like you had two heads.
Right.
There's some specific things around employee experience that have started to become almost table stakes for healthy workplaces, right? So one of them is transparency,
Hmm.
right? Management sharing what's going on in the company with their employees. One of them is authenticity, right?
Hmm.
Leaders being human and leaders being vulnerable.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the other is purpose and figuring out as a leader how to tie the work of the company to broader, broader societal goals, or just something bigger, something bigger than the work that the one staff accountant does every day, or the work that one engineer does every day.
Yeah.
Um, there are also some other things, around earlier career employees sometimes that have popped up more and more recently around, sort of entitlement or sort of slightly inflated self-view. But I think if you really kind of boil down to what's happened the last 20 years, it's been about this focus on employee experience, and how the leader meets the moment with the organization.
Hmm.
Um, so I think the that's a really important backdrop to what's been now developed since COVID, which are these kind of screwy work environments where some companies are in person all the time, and some are never in person, and some are flailing around trying to figure out what hybrid means. Um, on the one hand, you have CEOs of big banks that are saying, like, you must be at work 5 days a week, which is
Hmm.
kind of silly. That's not the direction the world was headed anyway before COVID, where there was like a little more
Right.
flexibility and a little more
Yes.
technology. Um, and the flip side, you had at the beginning of COVID, I think there are a couple of the big tech CEOs that shot themselves in the foot. 3 weeks in, they said, no one's ever going to have to come to an office again because look how well
Mm.
this works.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the reality is lifting and shifting an existing team and culture to online for a few weeks is no problem. But it's very hard to run a business that way
Right.
in perpetuity. So I think as leaders, figuring out how to steer an organization through um, this kind of transition of the moment from everyone used to generally be in person, but we're trending to more remote, to everyone was forced to be remote for a long time. By the way, that's true of businesses like yours and mine. That's not true if you worked in a restaurant or a hotel or a
Right.
hospital,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and sort of how to navigate the challenges with that. Like that's the challenge that leaders have today. And it's one of the things that's so interesting about the work that you're doing with your new firm, which is a lot of it has to do with communication. And I think um, when I talk about communication and think about communication, I think about it in both directions, right? It's how you speak and how you communicate outbound. It's also how you observe, right? How you
Yeah,
listen, how
absolutely.
you take information in. I think so. Here are some of the challenges that
Mm.
I see even in my own organization, but certainly other ones, right? One is um, how you as a leader manage to be present when
Mhm.
you're not present.
Yes.
And I don't think there is an example of anyone getting that right. You can be present in an office environment, with the old management by walking around, right? Sticking your head into a conference room or
Sure.
someone's
Yep.
office or popping by their desk. Now, how do you do that in a remote?
Remote. Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's figured that out exactly. I think there's another one, which is how do you strike the balance of policy? Are people remote? Are they in person? And again, like I don't think the world has quite figured that out yet. There are, there's an article every day about how here's the gold standard. It's doing it this way. It's doing it that way. And I don't think there's an answer to it. I think, the default that people seem to be heading towards is a world where you're in person a few days and remote a few days, and there's some flexibility around that. And that, quite frankly, for me personally, that works well. When I work from home, I get a lot more done. My head's down, if I come into the office, I'm working with hands-on with people in the office, or if I commute into the city, I'm able to see, clients and prospects in person a little bit more. So, it's sort of like compartmentalizing time by type of work as much as it is anything else. But there are a couple things that are really, I think, challenging for leaders to navigate with remote. And one of them I alluded to a minute ago is, what do you do with new employees? Right. So it's that, sort of, you can lift and shift the existing team, but how do you onboard and train a new employee as effectively when nobody's present? I was talking to a friend of ours the other day whose kid is in college and doing an investment banking internship this summer, and it's remote. And all I was thinking was, how the heck is that kid going to learn? So that's true of new employees to your organization. It's doubly true of new employees into the workforce, right, where they've never been
Sure.
trained,
Yeah, absolutely.
not just in
In
your
business
company,
at
but
all.
like in how to
Yeah.
be an effective worker.
Yeah.
And then I think there are a couple other things that people are going to find as time moves on, which is that the sort of remote only or remote dominant cultures are much tougher on introverts. And I think they're much tougher on historically underrepresented people in the workforce, women, people of color, depending on what your company does. There's something about being physically present that makes you part of groups and part of conversations, that it's much easier to be out of sight, out of mind. So I think those are some of the challenges that leaders are going to have to deal with. But it really does come down to, like, how are you present when you're not present? How do you observe things hands-on? This whole thing about, like, the quiet quitting, I think people call it. Like, the reason that has a new term right now isn't that it hasn't happened before. People have always been checked out before. People have always been burned out before. It was just easier to see.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
You can walk around and see someone at their desk, like, fidgeting around and playing a video game over and over and over again, or you could walk around and see that someone wasn't at their desk and wasn't at their desk the next day and the next day and the next day. So all of those things just are a lot more challenging in today's world. And I think again, coming back to the work that you're trying to do, sort of communication is really a backbone for getting a lot of these things right, however your company or one's company is going to settle into to new patterns.
Yeah, so 100%. I believe that. I mean, as you're discussing all these challenges, I'm thinking about solution for that, solution, right? And so, but the problem again is that we're facing is that in an organization, different people, as they experience the problems, wonder what's the solution to this, and they might go investigate for themselves. They might engage IT to help them investigate, whatever the case is. But to me, the biggest problem is that there's nobody in the organization who is tasked with solving that. Like, if they to me, there should be a chief communications officer who owns all of those problems. Right? How do we make sure that our employees aren't being checked out, that they're not quiet quitting, that they're, new employees that are new to the firm, that they're being integrated and ramped up, and people who are new to business entirely. And how can we just ensure productivity and efficiency? Like, the reason why the CEOs from the banks want people to come in, like, I agree with the reasons. Right? They're not dumb. They're not idiots. They're good reasons. They want better culture. They want the culture that they had pre-COVID. They want, the energy and the buzz, and they want, and the people who don't want to come into the office want those things. They want culture, and they want the buzz, and they want, the social aspect. I mean, I want it. I've worked from home for much of my career. And I wish, when I worked at Zoom, we had, I mean, everybody was on Zoom at that point, but, especially us. And I'm on Zoom calls all day. And I, for the first time in my career, really felt like it would have been nice if we had, and we started to ask for management, like, can we get like a WeWork space or something where we can come in, once. For me, for some people, it was once a week. For me, it was once probably every 2 weeks. But I would have loved to just go in every Friday and, mingle with colleagues and go out for lunch and stuff like that, go out for drinks afterwards. Because, it's necessary, and it's great, and it's an important part of work. So I think there's a lot in productivity and efficiency. Like, there are great reasons why in person is better. And even right now, right? Like, this is fantastic. I feel like, I feel like I'm really engaging with you, and, it's so much better than if we were just doing audio call only.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's not better than if we were in person, right? If we were in person, that would be the best, right?
That's right.
So I agree that in person is fantastic for many, many reasons, but unfortunately, nobody wants that anymore. Right?
I'm actually not sure that's right.
Okay.
Excuse me. I think there are people who want that.
There are people, for sure. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I mean, I think, hey, look, what's going to end up shaking out of this, if in fact there are companies that are, largely in person, companies that are fully remote, and companies that are hybrid, there will be a giant sorting process over time.
yeah,
That,
there you go. Yeah.
companies that behave that way will attract employees that want that kind of environment. The same way there are company cultures that are, super nice and friendly, and companies that are work hard, play hard. And, there will be a sorting process for that. It remains to be seen if any one of those things is going to be a winner, as opposed to just, that's the way it is there, and the right people will find their way there.
Yeah, exactly. It remains to be seen. And like I say, the VP that I spoke to at the bank yesterday, she realized, you know what, you're right. Like, the best people are going to leave, who are being forced to do things that they don't want. For people who want to go into the office for all the reasons that I just mentioned, that it's fantastic, right? And there are those people, they prefer to be in the office. They want to be away for several reasons. They want to be out of the house, because they want to be able to get out of the house, which I rarely ever do, right? If I get outside for an hour, especially these days, as a new CEO, if I get outside of the house for a walk at lunchtime, that's a good day for me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, if I to go back to commuting for 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, like, so many people, the vast majority, from every poll that I've seen, they're not interested in that. I want to come back to something, and I think this is so critical. There was a shift happening well before COVID, where more and more companies were starting to put employees first, and not just saying they put their people first, because even like you said, back in 1992, I think was the year that you said, every company back then, even back in 1892, probably, they were all saying that they put their, I don't know if we go that far back, that's true, but everybody's been saying that they've been putting their people first for the longest time. And they don't, in large part. And I've been privileged enough to have worked for some really great companies. Zoom, fantastic company, where Eric Yuan, same thing. He literally would say, if you're not happy, because his whole thing is two things: care and create happiness. Right. And he's like, if you wake up in the morning and you don't feel happy and you don't want to come into work, stay home. We'll still pay you. Don't worry about it. stay home and think about what's going on for you. Why are you not happy? Right. And then let's create happiness for you. Right. That is, that's kind of at the extreme end of from what I've seen. I don't know if there's a lot of CEOs that are taking that kind of position. But certainly every company has been saying, we value our people. That's the most important asset that we have, blah, blah, blah. But that's what it's been. It's been blah, blah, blah. Right. What I've seen with Eric Yuan and Zoom and yourself and ReturnPath and even a couple other companies is really putting their people first. Right. And I think that's why Eric Yuan and yourself really had the admiration and respect and commitment from the people. Right. Put your people first, and they'll take care of your customers.
Exactly.
And
Happy
when you
people,
take care of your
happy customers, happy shareholders.
there you go. Right. Yeah. And so it's you were doing that way back before a lot of companies that I knew of were doing that. When I started at ReturnPath, I remember it was unlimited vacation. And when I told people that, I started to work at this company, it was, one of the best companies in the US to work for, that we had, all these great perks. It was really a people first organization and unlimited vacation. They're like, unlimited vacation? What the heck? Like, it was unheard of. Like, there weren't a lot of companies doing that.
No, very few, and we actually call it open vacation. I don't think we ever called it unlimited because
okay.
the idea wasn't that you never had to come to work,
Right.
but the idea was that we didn't count the hours, that you were there, and we didn't want to count the hours that you weren't there. And the underpinning of open vacation for us was always freedom and flexibility for people in exchange for high performance, and we want people to have enough time off to be rested and recharged and have time to spend with their family and their friends and to travel and do the things they want to do. And we think that will fundamentally make for more engaged and happier and more productive people. So quite frankly, the challenge we had when we moved to the open vacation policy was getting people to take enough vacation. Because when you tell someone they have 2 weeks off, they take 2 weeks off, and when you tell them they can take whatever they want, sometimes they don't even take the 2 weeks. So
right.
I think we're pretty disciplined about we keep track of it just so we can remind people that they haven't taken vacation enough recently enough.
So do you still have that policy, the open?
We do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so did you find it to be true? Did you find that offering that perk and all the other perks, free lunches and all the things that ReturnPath and probably now Bolster, all the things that you did, again, pioneering the way in not just saying that your people were your most important asset, but actually proving it. And did you find that to be a good return on that investment?
Every time.
Every
100%.
time.
Yep.
Yeah. So speaking to Nick Marks, he's the CEO of a company called Friday Pulse.
Okay.
They're out of the UK, and he was on the show a couple weeks ago. And we were talking about the challenge that I was explaining, where who do you talk to about this problem of nobody owns communication in an organization, even though it's the most critical thing, and there's tons of frictions and challenges. Nobody owns it, and so I said, so we've been targeting CEOs and presidents, and he's like, well, how does that go? And I said, well, it can be challenging because they always agree that communication is critical, but they don't own it, and they don't want to own it, and they've got so many priorities.
They're a bad buying center.
They're a horrible buying center, exactly. And it's also just too huge. Like communication, like what do you mean? Communication, like you said, it's woven into everything. And so and so Nick's advice was, you've got, for when you're speaking to a CEO, you've got to be very specific and show them how it relates to increased sales, right? And that's advice that I've heard from several of my advisors and different people, and it's struck me as kind of funny, right? And I'd love to hear how it strikes you. But the idea that I have to explain to a CEO that putting their people first and really listening to them and giving them the technology to be able to do their best work and to be enabled fully to be able to, do their best work from wherever they want to work, from home, from office, from the cottage, all the different things that we look at when we do our audits. The idea that I have to translate that and connect the dots to more sales, that helping companies to identify and solve communications that create happier employees and create happier customers, that I have to draw the line to increase sales. To me, it just seems silly. Like, really, I have to explain that to a CEO? Surely a CEO knows that happier employees and happier customers means happier, more sales.
You would think so. So I think there's there are clearly some that are more enlightened than others.
Okay. And actually, one of the first conversations that I had with a friendly CIO who was a client, I talked about the idea that communication is everything, that is the most critical component. And I said, who in your organization, though, is tasked with maximizing and optimizing this most critical thing for better employee experiences and better customer experiences? And he said, HR. And I said, yeah, I mean, for your employee experiences, I'm sure that's true, but they probably come to you reactively. Like, when they hear about a technology, they go to a trade show, a salesperson, makes their way into that person. They don't get blocked out like most sales calls do.
Right.
An email gets through, then they hear about a technology, and then they send it over to the CIO. They send it over to IT, say, hey, do you want to investigate this for us? What do you think? This sounds interesting, right? It's always done reactively, right?
Yeah.
Relatively.
I think that's probably right. I think it's not 100% of the time, but it is the norm, certainly.
Yeah. So what I want to know is, where's the chief communication officers? If this is such a critical component of business, maybe the most important thing, then why is there not chief communication officers whose mandate is to, let's maximize this most critical thing?
Mm-hmm.
How do we, not reactively as sales calls come through to the various whatevers, but how do we proactively, continually identify, how do we communicate better in order to have happier employees and happier, more engaged customers?
Right.
That's the biggest challenge that we're facing. So we're running short on time here, so I'm going to let you go in a sec. But before I do, I mean, I've got the CEO who was before the pandemic, before the migration to really putting employees first. You were one of the pioneers, and the author of several books about startup CEO, startup CXO. I'd love to get your advice on, I guess, two things. One, what do you see as the biggest thing that executives are missing these days, or the biggest thing that they should be focusing on?
I think this is timeless. This is not just about today, but I think executives should always be focusing on their own growth, their own development, and their own learning. You are almost never the smartest person in the room. And whether you're learning from your customers, from your team, from a coach, or from a mentor, if we're not growing as humans, we're dead. So I always want to encourage anyone that I'm advising to just never lose that kind of personal growth mentality.
Love it. Thank you. That's fantastic. And I feel like that might answer the second question that I have. What advice would you give to, first-time CEOs like myself, or young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I would say on top of that one, the other thing that I would just say is that the entrepreneurial journey is one of extreme highs and extreme lows. And while that's true of a lot of things in life, one of the things that I always say is that entrepreneurship is one of the few places where you can have those things happen at the same time. You can have an extreme high and an extreme low literally on top of each other. So sometimes it's not so much a roller coaster as like you feeling like taffy and someone is just pulling you apart. So you need to just be ready for that. Be ready for that emotionally.
Yeah, wonderful. Matt, thank you so much. Matt Blumberg, tell the people, where can they reach you?
Bolster.com.
There you go. Wonderful. Matt, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Good to see you.